Welcome everybody to the Thoughtful Bro, live streaming as usual on Tuesdays at 2 with the Mighty Blaze. We are here to talk about, as always, what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick. A few comments before we get going. We have a jam-packed 45 minutes here with two amazing guests, so I have to be extra quick at the top of the show so we can leave time for both of them. But for those who may not know, A Mighty Blaze is an all-volunteer initiative helping writers reach readers virtually in the time of COVID and beyond. You can find scores and scores, and I think at this point, literally hundreds of interviews that we've done over the past year on our Facebook page mostly, but also archived on our YouTube page. I just want to make a quick public service announcement as well. We're hiring at The Blaze. We are looking for a few extra social media producers. We are just sort of growing too fast to keep up. And so we do need some help on social media. If you'd like to volunteer for the organization, just drop us an email. You can find the full library of Thoughtful Bro interviews on the Mighty Blaze and also on my website, markcecilauthor.com. As I said, we're all volunteer. We're not asking for anybody's money. Just follow us or give us a like on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or Twitter, and subscribe to our newsletter. Every week we send out a newsletter on Sundays and tells you all the interviews that we have coming up that week. What else did I want to tell you? If you are in the mood to spend money, of course, please spend it on the fantastic book 2034, which we're going to be spending the next 45 minutes talking about. If you want to send me an audience question, please just post it in the chat on YouTube or Facebook. I've already gotten a bunch of questions from you on my phone, so thank you for that. But just keep them coming and pop them in the chat. The next few weeks on A Thoughtful Bro, next week we have the hilarious debut by an author called Syed Masood. It's called The Bad Muslim Discount. And then the next few weeks we have some great guests coming up. One is Carolyn Kepnes, who wrote the books which became the show You on Netflix. The first season of You got streamed 42 million times on Netflix. It's one of the hottest shows Netflix has ever produced. And author Carolyn Kepnes will be on to talk about her next book. And then legendary literary fiction idol of mine, George Saunders, will be on the week after that. So it's got a great few weeks coming up. But that's all for intro. On to this week. So today on the show, we have Elliot Ackerman, who is an award-winning journalist and author. He is a National Book Award finalist and has written 5 novels and a memoir. He served 5 tours of duty as a Marine in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as 1 term as a White House Fellow during the Obama administration. Joining us also is Admiral Jim Stavridis. He is spent 30 years in the Navy, rising ultimately to the rank of 4-star Admiral. He is the former Supreme Allied Commander at NATO, and his 9 nonfiction books have sold over 200,000 copies worldwide. His 2020 TED Talk on global security has over 1 million views, and he also holds a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts, where he served 5 years as dean. 2034 is the Admiral's first novel. And just a bit about the book, it is a page-turning thriller. I just tore through this thing. I'm not alone in this. Almost everybody who reads this book is giving it high praise for its pacing and the characters. It is a sobering cautionary tale about the future of warfare. The Washington Post said, "This crisply written novel reads like an all-caps warning for a world shackled to the machines we carry in our pockets and place on our laps, while only vaguely understanding how the information stored there can be exploited." And in a starred review, Kirkus said that this is, quote, "a frightening look at how a major power showdown might race out of control. It's a compelling thriller that should be required reading for our national leaders and translated into Mandarin." It is already #1 in political fiction, political thrillers, and military thrillers on Amazon. And with that said, welcome to the Thoughtful Bro, Elliot and Admiral.
Mark, thanks for having us.
Awesome. All right. So guys, we're going to talk a little bit about how the book came to be, and then we're going to talk about the book itself. And then at the end, I'm going to do a little bit of a lightning round about your experience writing this book together, which should be fun. But Admiral, why don't you just kick us off and tell us, what is this book about?
The book opens in the South China Sea, which is a vast body of water disputed between the U.S. and China. It's in 2034. A woman commodore of a 3-ship flotilla is on a freedom of navigation patrol through those disputed waters. An incident ensues. There is miscalculation on both sides, and suddenly the U.S. and China are plunged into a potential war. Simultaneously, a few minutes later, if you will, a very advanced Joint Strike Fighter. Suddenly, the pilot has no control and it's forced down over Iran. So those two events kick this off, and you meet a cast of characters. I'm going to let my co-author, Elliot Ackerman, describe the characters because he does it so well. Elliot.
Oh, thanks, Jim. Sure. So that we mentioned that patrol in the South China Sea is being led by Commodore Sarah Hunt. That F-35 strike fighter is being piloted by fourth generation Marine fighter pilot Chris Wedge Mitchell. And when those two events occur at almost the exact same moment, the news is sent to Sandy Chowdhury, a mid-level official at the National Security Council. And everyone's trying to figure out what's going on. And as they're trying to piece together these events, Chowdhury's phone rings in the White House, and it is Admiral Lim Bao, the current military attaché from China, and he has a few answers as to what's going on. And when that F-35 strike fighter is taken down and the pilot loses all control and Wedge loses control of it, it lands on an airstrip in Iran, and who's there to meet him but Brigadier Qasim Farshad, named after Qasim Soleimani, a veteran of wars against the United States all over the globe. And those five characters are the principal characters that really take you through this book and kind of take you around the world, which is 2034.
And last thought, in the very opening pages, there's a cyber attack, a very significant one, which becomes a kind of leitmotif that runs through the novel. So that's the setup, folks.
The setup is amazing, and I have so much praise to heap upon this book, which I'll kind of spread out through this interview. But the beginning is particularly, well crafted. I mean, there's this Admiral I've heard you talk about in other interviews about how you've never been in a combat situation where you truly knew what was going on at all times, and you don't get the full information till much later, if ever. And that rapid pace, kind of jumping from character to character and everybody trying to figure out, hey, wait, what's happening here really? It was just so bracing. I loved the opening of the book. But guys, I just want to jump back to a little bit kind of how this book came into being. So could you just enlighten us a little bit on first just how you guys know each other and how you decided to write this book?
It started with an idea that I had to look at Cold War fiction. So Dr. Strangelove, the Third World War, Failsafe, the Bedford Incident, On the Beach, those novels that were cautionary tales that helped us imagine how terrible it would have been if the US and the Soviet Union had gone to war. And it occurred to me there was no such literature thus far about US and China, who to me, it feels as though these two nations are kind of sleepwalking toward each other. So I took that idea to my wonderful editor who had worked on many of my previous nonfiction books, and I pitched him on, can the Admiral write a novel? And he said, Admiral, you're a great guy, but let me get a novelist to work with you. And with that, Elliot Ackerman popped up, and I'll let him describe why I was so pleased when my editor suggested Elliot Ackerman. A preview alert, I've known him for most of a decade. Elliot.
Right. So, Jim and I have known each other for the better part of 10 years. We're both graduates of the Fletcher School. And so before all of this, when he was dean, he brought me on as the writer in residence for a semester. And one of my collateral duties listed in a bullet point was talk with the dean about books when he feels like it. We spent a lot of time talking about books, nonfiction, but lots of fiction. We shared an editor, and he said, Jim's got this idea. I think you guys could do a really interesting collaboration. We talked about it. We're totally aligned in terms of the vision for the book, what it should be. Some of the character attributes you mentioned, Mark, character focused, good pacing, contained. This isn't a huge door stopper of a book. It's an easy-ish read. And so once we were aligned, we said, well, hey, let's see if we can write a first chapter. So we sat down, wrote a first chapter, and from there we were off to the races.
Amazing. And the authenticity of the book was just off the charts. There was just, I mean, there's like a few moments that I'll pull out that I loved. One was there's a scene where like these sharks are getting ground up in these propellers of a ship. There's a great aerial dogfight. There is an amazing little scene where this senior Chinese military attaché, Lin Bao, who is like probably my favorite character in the book, he's like he's like managing this out of control global conflict, but he has to like carpool to work. And there's like this little scene where he's carpooling to work. And I just thought the point of all this is to say only people like yourselves could have written with this kind of authority and kind of rich detail to bring these characters to life. And so I guess my question is, I heard a reviewer say that you guys are an ideal pairing, and I would like just to hear from both of you, maybe Elliot go first, just kind of what do you think that you particularly brought to this that like what was a strength of yours that helped bring particular kinds of authenticity to the work?
Listen, I think, when you look at characters, when I look at the book now, it's all on the page, and like little moments like you just alluded to, I can tell you sort of where we were pulling from to create those moments, things from our own experience, things from our imaginations. And I think, I hope what I bring to this book is just an eye for some of the things in books that are absurd and sublime at the same time, and when you see them, you need to capture them because they're real.
Yeah.
I would say first and foremost, each of these characters has a little bit of each of us in it, but I love Lin Bao also. He's a desk-bound naval officer in Washington, dying to get back to sea. He cares so deeply about his family. He has both American and Chinese roots, although he's 100% loyal to China, as he should be. And at the end of his career, he dreams of becoming a professor, to becoming a teacher. And so there's a lot, in my view, to like about Lin Bao. And it brings an important point, which is that this is not a good guys, bad guys, Tom Clancy techno thriller kind of book. There's only one villain in this book, and it's war itself. And just on the point of authenticity, somebody on an interview previously said, well, what do other military insiders think about this book? Well, first of all, Elliot and I probably qualify as military insiders.
I think so.
But I would tell you, just flip the book over, and on the back is an incredibly strong endorsement from one of my life mentors, Secretary of Defense and Director of the CIA, Bob Gates, and one of my contemporaries, General Jim Mattis, later on Secretary of Defense, and also two other serious combat veteran, Karl Marlantes, who wrote maybe the best book about Vietnam, Matterhorn, and Phil Clay, who's a mutual friend of Elliot's and mine, who won the National Book Award for his book of short stories, Redeployment. So yeah, I think the book rings true, and there are plenty of folks who know the terrain who would agree with that.
Yeah, we had Phil on the show. I had Phil on the show in the fall, and his book also is amazing. His latest book, I think,
Missionaries.
It might go for the National Book Award again. That thing was amazing. One last great detail. There's this amazing moment. I have this friend, and we're always talking about moments that we see in like literature and in movies, where like subtle ways men size each other up, and subtle ways that they figure out who's more powerful in a situation. And there's this amazing moment. I'm not spoiling anything because it's right at the beginning, where Lin Bao is like eating some M&Ms, and with his like American counterpart, they're trying to negotiate a kind of they're kind of trying to head off this conflict that's rising. And Lin Bao just throws this wrapper of M&Ms on the ground. And
of the White House.
And they say, are you going to pick that up? And he says, no. And it's like, oh, what a moment. I mean, that's just brilliant writing. Who came up with that scene?
That was Elliot. I'll give you another scene that I particularly like, and it's a golf match between Admiral Lin Bao and a somewhat more senior Chinese general. And to me, that scene is very reminiscent of the golf match in the James Bond novel Goldfinger, where Goldfinger and Bond play golf. A little homage there as well.
Oh yeah, and I love how too, like Lin Bao, you see how trapped he is because he admits like he's playing golf against somebody who could end his life, but he's deciding how to play golf in that context. Oh, we could just spend 45 minutes talking about how many awesome moments there are in this book, but let's keep going. Admiral, tell us what the Thucydides problem is and why is it relevant to this book?
Yeah, the Thucydides Trap is an expression coined by Graham Allison of Harvard University in the context of U.S.-China relations. And Graham looked at history, and he went back 2,500 years ago, and I know he's accurate because I'm Greek-American, and he looked at Athens and Sparta, established power challenged by rising power. And he identified 18 incidents in human history over 2,500 years in which that is the case. And in the majority of them results in a global war. The first one being the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, the most recent being World War I, established power, United Kingdom, rising power, the Kaiser's Germany. Well, here we are. Established power, United States, rising power, China. Can we avoid that so-called Thucydides trap or not? That's kind of the theme of 2034, is to show how terrible it would be, how real it is as a possibility, with the theory that we can then still have time to reverse engineer this thing and avoid it.
Right. And Elliot, I want to come to you with a question about conflict of escalation. I mean, there is, I think one of the principal messages of this book comes around the way that this conflict comes about. It's this series, there's kind of like a lot of saber rattling going on. There's miscalculations, there's rush to judgment, sort of like one escalation provokes another, and then everybody feels trapped and is forced to respond. And then there's a great quote in the book that I like. Somebody is saying to an American, isn't the world large enough for your government and Beijing's? Perhaps you'll win this war, but for what? And I just kept reading this book, like stepping back for a moment and thinking like, but why is this happening? And I guess, Elliot, my question to you is, can you just speak to, is it probable that a war could begin on such kind of irrational and frankly poor motives as this one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, listen, wars are fought between nations oftentimes, and nations are collections of people, and people are deeply fallible. I mean, how many people do we know that have acted against their best interests? You know, I'm sure we all have that friend who just continually is going against what is best for him or her. And so, you know, the quote you mentioned there, I think gets directly to that point, which is just because, you know, objectively, this doesn't necessarily seem as though it's in a nation's best interests, don't believe that this can't happen. And I think that we should all stop and wait a beat. And as we're telling ourselves that these conflicts can't happen, whether it's because the United States and China are economically interlinked, or even because of just the sheer physical and human cost of these conflicts, you know, we still need to do the hard work of steering clear of them and frankly, imagining them as a way to steer clear.
Two books in this regard that were sort of in my mind as I was ruminating about the idea, both by Barbara Tuchman, who might be the best pure writer to act also as a historian, and that's a high bar. Her book, The Guns of August, is about how Europe sleepwalked into a war, despite the fact that all the economies were intertwined, despite the fact that the royal families were intertwined by blood and marriage. And the second one is her book largely about the U.S. and Vietnam. It's got a great title, The March of Folly. And believe me, you are never going to run out of money by betting on humans and folly and miscalculation. That's a big part of 2034.
And Admiral, I've heard you say, this is a quote, big doors swing on very small hinges. And I thought that was just very poetic and powerful. And that's sort of what you're talking about, right?
It is, and I'll give you another layer on that, which both Elliot and I had in our minds, both of us having been in and around the National Security Council staff. I had 6 tours of duty in the Pentagon, 1 tour of duty at State Department. I know Washington well. Elliot does as well, particularly from his time as a White House fellow. And what you see in Washington so often is how one or two young staffers with a comment at one particular moment can swing a whole conversation, sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. But those big doors swing on small hinges. Again, back to the human element, the possibility of miscalculation, even when it seems irrational.
Right. Great. So I want to move on to just talk about the characters a little bit. I mean, the characters in this book were amazing. There is Lin Bao, who we've talked about. There's this character Wedge, who is this kind of like brings the Top Gun machismo to the scene. He's like straight out of the volleyball scene in Top Gun. Then you have like Commodore Sarah Hunt. I just thought it was like pretty interesting that you open the book with two extremely senior naval officers who are both women, both smoking Cuban cigars. I thought that was sort of an interesting statement. And so I just want to start off with that. Elliot, just the book seemed to be saying a lot about diversity. I mean, you have a female president. You have these very high-ranking female officers in the Navy. There's even an attack submarine called the Michelle Obama. So were you consciously trying to make a point about, this is only 13 years in the future, but about the kind of gender and race diversity of the United States and the United States military?
To be honest with you, Mark, we weren't trying to make any political point except for just trying to say, what is the world going to look like in 2034? Yeah. This is what it's going to look like. This is the future. I mean, and very much this is right now. So if we were to create a cast of characters that looked like it belonged in, the film Midway,
right?
It wouldn't make any sense in 2034. So, look, I try to write the books that I enjoy reading. I don't enjoy reading books that are political polemics. We're not trying to make a polemic. I think we're just trying to say, like, this is what it looks like, and it's only going to look more like this. I'll add one thing, because you mentioned our reference to the attack submarine, the Michelle Obama, and you mentioned Phil. Early on when we were writing this book, I mentioned that to Phil, that we had the Michelle Obama in there, and he said, well, you know what their motto's got to be? I said, well, we go low.
Our producers
can I just make a point? Can I make a point about women in the military?
Please.
With Tucker Carlson the other day, ran this scurrilous series of commentary and photographs of pregnant women service members to somehow denigrate the service of women. Listen, I'm in the military. I looked up Tucker Carlson's biography. I didn't see anything in there about his time in the military. I did 37 years. I commanded ships that were mixed gender repeatedly. And one of the finest officers I know is a woman admiral, just retired, 4-star Admiral Michelle Howard, tough as nails. She was the 1-star on-scene commander at the rescue of Captain Phillips. She gave the order for the SEALs to take out the Somali pirates. Listen, let me tell you, women are nothing but additive to the U.S. military. Full stop.
That's great. And I want to say I totally agree. And I didn't, frankly, interpret what the diversity in the book as a political statement. I thought it was cool. And I thought it was, frankly, forward-looking, or even not even forward-looking. It's what it's like right now. Admiral, you said about this book in another interview. Somebody said, well, hey, you've got so much to say about, cyber warfare and so on. Like, why didn't you write a policy paper? And you said, well, because I wanted people to read it. and I thought that was really interesting. And I think you went on to make a point in this other show that you think characters is what makes people read books.
Yeah, 100%. I'd ask everybody who's watching, just stop for 1 second and think, what's my favorite novel? What is the novel that just rattles around in my brain?
Yeah.
For me, it's The Old Man and the Sea, Ernest Hemingway, and I'm an old man and I spent a lot of time at sea. So The Old Man and the Sea, it's been my favorite novel my whole life. It's not that I can remember every single thing that happens. There's a Cuban fisherman and there's a small boat and sharks eat his fish. And that's all detail. What you remember is the character. You remember Santiago the fisherman. You remember his resilience, his compassion, the way he inspires the young who follow behind him. It's all about characters for me anyway. Like Elliot said, you write what you would want to read. This book is one, I love reading it. I reread it recently And at the end of it, I teared up about some of the outcomes of some of those characters.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. I wish there was a particular moment that made me tear up at the end, but I don't want to reveal what it is actually because it gives something away. But suffice it to say, it got me too. All right, Admiral, we're going to stick with you for this next question. An American cyber force. I heard you make a remark. There's an estimated 40 billion devices on Earth that are connected to the internet, and each one of those devices is an attack surface. When will the United States have a cyber force which is on similar footing to the other branches of the military?
Oh boy. Well, the correct answer to the question is, we did it 10 years ago because we could imagine this moment that we're in, but we didn't. The good news is we created a space force in the last administration, smart move, and that will kind of lay the tracks, I think, for a cyber force. I'd say it's within the next 3 years. And it's inevitable that we will have it. And sometimes people say, well, we don't really need a cyber force. Each of the services can do their own cyber work. Hey, go back 60, 70, 80 years ago. People said the exact same thing about a U.S. Air Force. They said, we don't need an Air Force. The Army and the Navy and the Marines, they can handle the air part of this thing. Today, we couldn't imagine not having an Air Force. I think we're way behind the power curve. We need a cyber force like yesterday. I hope it comes in the next 3 years.
Right. And Elliot, a question to you about this book and expanding the imagination of the general public about these issues. I've heard both of you, I think, say that Pearl Harbor and 9/11 were failures of the imagination to some extent. It was just unimaginable that, the Japanese Navy could reach Pearl Harbor in that time. And 9/11, it was unimaginable that with a few credit cards, the guys could hijack airplanes and tear down the World Trade Center. And I've just kind of heard both of you speak to how you seem to be trying to broaden through this novel the imagination about how vulnerable we really are. Elliot, what would you have to say about that?
Yeah, I would just reinforce the points you made. I mean, listen, who would have imagined 18 months ago we'd all be sitting here on Zoom after having virus? If you have kids, teaching your kids their third grade math. I mean, if you look at the last 100 years, Pearl Harbor, the September 11th attack, a 20-year war in Afghanistan, I didn't imagine that, and this pandemic. You can see a lot of the disasters that the United States has faced are all failures of imagination. And if that's the case, then at a certain point, you have to say that imagination becomes a national security imperative. And we have to be actively imagining what is going to come next so we can be ready for it. And if we're not doing that type of hard work, and if we're not committed to it, we're just going to keep reliving these cycles where we're caught by surprise.
Right.
In fact, Elliot and I have co-written a short piece that's going to be out in the Washington Post, the nation's top newspaper in so many ways, is going to be out over the next day or so.
Great. Amazing. It's interesting. George Saunders, who, like, as I said, he's going to be on the show in a couple of weeks, but I was listening to an interview with him recently, and somebody asked him about the current political climate, and he said, the failure of American politics is the failure of American storytelling. And, I think that, the ability to kind of communicate to people effectively through story is what gets their attention. And I think that's very much what you guys are up to here. A couple other questions before we get to this lightning round that I teased so deftly at the top of the show. Elliot, there's a lot of kind of soul searching about the American character in this work. A lot of it is done by the kind of the enemies of the United States. I mean, as they stand in this book, people who are against us, denigrating the kind of the blithe optimism, the lack of a kind of ability to look long term, the decline of American exceptionalism, and so on and so forth. I guess I just want to hear, is there something kind of overall that you were just trying to say about that Americans should be aware of about their own character, or are we in decline, frankly?
I think, listen, the book is obviously, it's a book about the next world war and China, but it's also a book that is about America, and it's about how America would face such a challenge. And the characters are all not American, right? They are obviously, it's a diverse cast, Chinese admiral, brigadier general from Iran. You know, those characters, they step on the stage, and I always try to write those characters as though they get time to make their case, as though they're making that case before God. So they're going to tell you, the reader, all the reasons why you should see the world their way, and they're going to say to the reader, and this is how I see America. And it shouldn't surprise you. We're trying to create a realistic portrait of how someone antagonistic to America might view our faults. And so we interrogate those faults. You know, am I negative on America? I'm not negative on America. But I do believe we have some real, you know, just as you mentioned, some real internal challenges that we are struggling to surmount at the moment. And the divisiveness, the hyper-partisanship that we see in our government, the fact that the pandemic did not bring us together but seemed to only drive us all further apart, that should also concern us as much as any type of external Chinese or Iranian threat. And we should all be doing the kind of soul searching to figure out how we're going to make sure this country's in a good position in 2034, should these challenges come.
And Admiral, sort of to follow up with the same sort of question to you, but I mean, I'm also curious, are these the kinds of opinions that you hear directly when you're talking to people from overseas?
Oh, absolutely. The challenge for us is this internal division and the whipsaw it creates in our politics, which makes us candidly less reliable if you're in NATO, less reliable if you're in Tokyo or Seoul or Canberra. You've got to wonder, is another administration going to come in and sort of whipsaw the approach? But I do want to hit a positive note here, which is if we can overcome those divisions, nothing can stop us. Yeah. Our best days are not behind us. We have so many advantages: a vast continent, natural resources, arable land, fresh water, young population. People want to come here. Immigration helps us. We have Silicon Valley smarts and a biotech to match in the Boston side. We can do this. We've just got to get people pulling together.
Great. Great. Okay, so I want to go into, before we get to audience questions, we do have a few that I've seen popping up here. I want to go through this lightning round. So just kind of do your best to answer these questions as concisely as you can. Elliot, we'll start with you, and I'm going to give the same question to both of you. In the writing of this book, what was the quality of your co-author that most impressed you?
His vision.
Okay. His vision, like, for the work?
Like vision for the work and the arc of the story and where everything was going to go. Yeah, the vision.
How about you, Admiral?
Elliot's sense of character, of being able to go in the mind of these individual characters and make them come alive in front of you.
Beautiful. All right, so this is a slightly different question for each of you, but I'm going to ask a different question to each of you. Admiral, what do you like most about writing fiction versus nonfiction?
I like the freedom of it. To write nonfiction is like being in a straitjacket. Everything's footnoted, everything is referenced, got to be accurate. It tends to get a little boring and dry. When you throw off that straitjacket and you've got a full canvas, you can really start splashing some paint around, and that is fun. And secondly, you can stretch your imagination, you can walk into the future, you can do it with characters and storytelling. I love it.
Great. And then for you, Elliot, what do you like about co-authoring? Like, what's better about co-authoring? It's a mysterious process that I'm mystified by, but what do you like better about it versus just writing a solo book?
Because you have a partner who can kind of get your imagination going in all sorts of directions it wouldn't otherwise go, and you can bounce ideas off of each other that obviously you don't do when you're just writing something on your own.
Right. All right. So, Elliot, we'll stick with you for the last lightning round question. If you could have one person, if you could compel one person to read this book, who would it be?
Yeah, I would say it's the American who isn't thinking about any of this, and get people who aren't sitting there thinking about these types of issues every single day to wake up to them a little bit, and be aware of the future that might exist for us if we don't kind of get our act together.
And if I could just follow quickly up on that before, Admiral, you go. Let's say that did happen, and I think it will. Then what can somebody do about it if you're just a citizen and you suddenly become alarmed about these issues? What could you do then?
And listen, one of the things I love about books are, books are community, and people talk about books and they spread word. We all know what really sells books: word of mouth. That's because that's how people engage with books. So what can a person do? Just, engage with ideas, talk about it. Talk about it with a friend. I think that is what changes the conversation the most powerfully. Great.
And Admiral, who would you compel to read this book?
Easy. President Xi of China. And wow. And think about it. If he liked it, if he even held it in his hand for a photo op, think about how many books we would sell. Seriously, I would want him to read it. And I would ask him to read it with an open mind and accept the fact that no good guys, no bad guys here. War is the villain. And I hope President Joe Biden, who I know from my days as Supreme Allied Commander when he was VP, I hope he gets a chance to read it too. But I got to go with President Xi first.
Got it. And is it going to be translated into Mandarin?
We don't know yet. We have sold foreign sales rights, I think, in 6 countries so far. My previous books I'm probably up to 14 different countries. I think we'll get in that range. A couple of my books have been published in Mandarin. I'm crossing my fingers on this. You didn't ask the traditional question, which is, what is the movie going to be like? And okay, so I'll just pose it for you. But we are in some very loose conversations. It would be pretty wonderful to see it come to a screen. So stay tuned.
Okay. If this thing is not a movie, the movie industry is a travesty. I would watch that movie in a second. All right. Note to our producer, if you want to pop some questions up on screen, go right ahead. Here we go. Was there anything in your writing that you disagreed on?
I would say our only disagreement was a minor one, and it's a small technical issue. It was on driverless cars. Featured driverless cars in 2034. I think without giving anything away, they are not heavily spotlighted in 2034. There's sort of this, but it gets into this idea of what's the mood you're trying to create. Mm-hmm. And let me ask you a question. Like, let's say you had a robot that could do all your dishes and cleaning for you around the house. Would it be more creepy if the robot looked like R2-D2, or would it be more creepy if the robot looked like almost exactly like a real person, like 99% like a real person? So I think
super creepy.
The mood of the book, we wanted it to really feel a lot like 2021. So you could recognize it. So the little things that were different would creep you out just all the more.
Yeah. Great. All right, here we go. Piggybacking on Mary's question, I would love to hear about the writing process, who wrote what and how, back and forth, intensive plotting beforehand. Again, it is a mysterious thing, how this co-authoring works.
Yeah, I don't know how other co-writing duos have worked, but I had kind of an overarching idea. I had a detailed outline. That was the package that Elliot and I embarked on. It was constant phone calls and Skype calls to reshape the outline and frankly to downsize it, to put some things off stage so the book wouldn't turn into a doorstopper, as Elliot says. Elliot took a first crack at each chapter, then I would respond in detail. We'd go back and forth, iron out any differences. Elliot, am I leaving anything out?
No, that was it. It was for a grim book, it was a fun book to write.
Yeah, it seemed that way. I have another question here from the audience. I'll just read it from my phone. Tom, you can pop up questions if you'd like. But I have one brother who served in the Navy and one who served in the Marines, and there it is. And we're forever arguing over which is tougher. Who is it, Navy or Marines? Let's go.
It's the Marines. Okay, I stipulate. I say that because my father was a career officer in the Marine Corps. I grew up in the Marine Corps. I went to Quantico High School. I know how tough Marines are. Believe me, I was well served going into the Navy and being a destroyer officer. I'll give Elliot that one. The Marines are the tougher.
It's a good thing Mary didn't ask who's got the sharper looking uniform, because that really might be us.
All right, I have another question here from Mike that came to my phone about whether you guys are going to work on something like a sequel, anything coming up next?
I am open to the idea. I was scaring Elliot by saying the title of our next book should be 2054, a novel of the next pandemic. I don't think that'll be a bestseller, so we'll probably go somewhere else.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. I'd certainly be open to working together again, and hopefully we'll have that chance.
By the way, I did hear you talk about this in another interview, but I just I have to bring it up with the date thing. You know, that like 1984 obviously is a very famous book in this genre, and then you have your book is like set 50 years later, if I'm doing my math correctly, I think. And so was that like an intentional thing? Like 50 years later, here's another speculative fiction novel?
No, I think that it wasn't specifically 50 years. You know, when we were doing early drafts, the date was actually, I think in the earliest drafts was like in the late 2050s, and it kept closer and closer the more we were imagining. It's like, oh, this is going to be, no, not 2040, and we got into 2030. So that conversation was running so that by the time we were kind of far along in the book, and we, hadn't yet landed on a title, something was like, it should be 2034. We keep talking about this. This is when the book is going to take place. And, it falls into, books like 1984, 2001, A Space Odyssey. There are certainly, that rich legacy of books that kind of use a year as a marker on the wall to fit the story.
All right, let's take one more audience question, then I have a final question. So you recommended some great books at the end of the Wired issue, including The Levers by Lisa Ko and The Three-Body Problem, both very different genre-wise from your book. Can you talk about the very well-rounded role literature has in these kinds of discussions? And Tom, could you take that off the screen so we can see Elliot again?
Yeah, I'll kick off. Again, there's such a rich body of Cold War literature, and it really spans the genre spectrum, if you will, from Stanley Kubrick, who wrote Dr. Strangelove, all the way to Neville Shute, an Australian who writes On the Beach about a very gentle ending to the world. In the middle are things like the Bedford Incident, Fail Safe. What I really took from the literature of the period was that if we were going to do this effectively, you had to narrow the scope, not write Red Storm Rising, 700 pages, not write Winds of War and War and Remembrance, 1,200 pages, not write War and Peace. We wanted to narrow the frame and make it, again, very character-driven. So those are some of the Cold War books that really sparked my interest.
I would only add, this is, we're writing into what is a very rich tradition, right? The idea of these dystopian, apocalyptic stories that you read, they cause you to reflect on your own moment and then perhaps to behave better in the moment. I would reach all the way back to the Bible and the book of Revelations, like the original apocalyptic novel that is designed for you to behave better in the moment. This book was very much written with the spirit of, hopefully this is something we can avoid.
Perfect. All right, look, last question for me. I ask this question to all the authors that come on the show. So you can each take a turn. Maybe Elliot, you go first on this one. So imagine the ideal reader for this book. This is somebody who is just getting exactly what you're up to, and everything that you wish they would understand and feel about the book, they are understanding and feeling. And just imagine that reader gets to the end of the book, closes the book. Just describe to me in a word or a phrase, what is the feeling they have, or boiled down the message they take from that work?
Yeah, I hope they would just take away. Listen, when I shut any book, if it's a good book, the book is rattling around in my head afterwards, and it's causing me to ask questions and to look at the world around me somewhat differently. So I hope someone will shut this book, the characters will stay with them, and perhaps the next time they open up a newspaper and read a story, whether it's China, Iran, or even something going on here in the United States, they might see echoes of 2034 in those stories.
I hope that they close the book and they look up and they see their children, or they look out the window and they see a tree growing, or they get up and they go for a walk and they think how precious our world is and how fragile it is and how we could lose it if we don't avoid the events of 2034. This is a pretty good life we've got.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. No better way to end than that. That was just incredible. Admiral Stavridis, I just want to say thank you so much. Elliot, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody at home, thank you for all your questions, and thanks for tuning into The Thoughtful Bro. And please go out and buy 2034. You will not be disappointed. Even if military fiction isn't quite your thing, this book, you just won't be able to put it down. It has my AAA plus recommendation.
Great.
So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week on A Thoughtful Bro.
Thanks, everybody.